So we're exploring this other realm today, but before we make it there, I want to just shout out to the band because you guys are preaching today. It's just beautiful, isn't it? Greg's rocking Rhonda's glasses, and it's great. It really is. It's a holy moment, so thank you all for sharing. Okay, so this message today comes to you from you. If you recall, we've been kind of capturing the ideas that you guys have for services and for sermons, and this particular topic comes from that, this out-of-this-world topic. And it came at the suggestion of exploring near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. According to a survey, up to 10% of the population have had an out-of-body experience. These can range from involuntary out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences that happen after a trauma. It's also called astral projection, in which a person voluntarily leaves his or her body behind and ascends to a spiritual plane where truth and clarity can be found. So, this was a good challenge for me because it sent me to the Bible to see where there was near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. It was kind of fun for me to be able to do this. And, of course, there are those traditional ones that we know of, right? There was Jonah being swallowed by a whale. That's a little different. Jacob wrestling with an angel. Jesus bringing Lazarus back to life. And, of course, there's John's revelation in the book of Revelation. If you ever have a lot of time on your hands, take a look at that. John is actually looking at how Jesus will overcome evil and uses some profound imagery. Perhaps the most interesting text I've found, which I'm sure I've read at some point, but I don't ever remember reading it before, is from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. And Paul says this: I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in body I do not know or whether out of body I do not know, God knows, such a one was caught up to the third heaven. And I know such a man, whether in body or out of body I do not know, God knows how he was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words which it is not lawful for a man to utter. Now, some scholars believe that this is actually Paul talking about Paul. Paul and, what was that president? George Bush. They think alike, but he's talking about himself in the third person. And he may not be clear on what it is that happened, and that's why he chooses to talk in the third person. He has been granted this special experience with God, this special encounter, but since he can't explain it, he doesn't feel he can rely on it. And like any good preacher, he doesn't preach something that he doesn't truly understand. What I find interesting is whatever happened in Paul's life, if this is actually Paul, he decided to write about it. It was important enough to write about it. And Paul included something that he didn't understand, which is really a big deal because Paul was all about figuring it all out for all of us. But this is this little teeny passage where he's like, I don't know, but it's an experience he had. I'm curious if there are folks out there who have had experiences that you cannot explain. I have to tell you, I had one many years ago, and in fact, I can tell you, I don't think I've ever preached about this. My out-of-body experience, or not, happened years ago when I was in seminary. I was working full-time and also working at night, singing with my band. And in the midst of all of this, I bought a house. And it just so happened that the closing date on this house moved suddenly to the place where if I moved in a matter of about 24 hours, I could save a whole month's rent. So, of course, I got all my buddies in line, and I said, come on, let's get this done, and we did it. I was not ready for a move. It was one of those, you know how you help a friend move and they still have food in the refrigerator and haven't put anything away? We've all helped that friend move. That was me that time. And so we moved everything, and it was probably the most exhausting 24 hours I can ever remember in my life. It was a Saturday. I remember very clearly it was a Saturday. My group was playing down at Union Station. We used to play in that big area there under that rose window. And I knew I had to get to work, but I was so tired. I just wanted 5 minutes. I just wanted to lay down for 5 minutes. So there was the mattress laying on the floor, and I went and I laid down on the mattress. And well, before I knew it, this seminary student was looking at herself, laying on the mattress. Now, most people think if someone was in seminary at this point, they would say, "Where's Jesus? And let me have a conversation." No, my first thought was, there's no sheet on that bed. That's gross. My first thought. Then the second thought is even more holy. The painters missed a spot above the ceiling fan here that I need to add to the checklist. Now, I remember vividly these two experiences. I wish I could say they were really holy and profound, but that was the experience. Next thing I knew, I was in the shower getting ready for work and thought, wait a minute, did that happen? And so really, I did this. I got out of the shower and I went up and I looked, and sure enough, where you couldn't see it above the ceiling fan, there was a big spot that had been missed. Ooh. So maybe that happened, or like Paul, maybe it didn't. I don't know. Perhaps you have that kind of experience. Sometimes I kind of looked up about this because I've never had the courage to preach on this, that sometimes these out-of-body experiences often happen when we're exhausted, when we're tired, when we're overwhelmed. And it's kind of like maybe your spirit's desire to just check out for a little bit. I've heard people say when they were in the midst of really serious addiction, they didn't experience God at all. And their belief is that somehow the Spirit kind of hung out with them, but not in them. And I think that's kind of an interesting thought. Now, like I said, I can't explain it, and I probably shouldn't be preaching about it, but like Paul, I can see that God will try to enter this world in a variety of different ways beyond our understanding. And it's okay to talk about it. Now, there are those who have had these kind of encounters that are more like near-death encounters, right? There was a pastor named Don Piper who wrote a book called 90 Minutes in Heaven. He was declared dead at an automobile accident, and then some man came and prayed with him, and he came back to life. And so he was dead for, I guess, 90 minutes. I have to be honest, I haven't read the book, but he was dead for 90 minutes, and how profoundly that changed his life when he came back, and how it changed the way he looked at life when he came back. Heaven is for real. Do you guys remember that? Colton Burpo, who is the son of a pastor, had a glimpse into heaven after a severe illness. While there, he encounters family members who had died before he was even born, and even a child who had been miscarried. Maybe it happened. Maybe it didn't. This past week, I read Proof of Heaven, a book by neurosurgeon Eben Alexander, and I highly recommend it. It's really a fascinating book. And in that, he gives his own personal, scientific, yet a little bit faithful experience of his glimpse of life after this life. And, well, he got a lot of press a few years ago, and here's a video where he talks a little bit about that experience. Says he was able to surrender to the event in part, he believes, because his brain was totally out of energy, was not working anymore. And he said because he thought it would probably be too hard for him to think about who he was leaving behind on earth. He thinks that really freed him up for a profound experience and that orb of light. Not only did that orb of light welcome him, but at one point it said, "You are not here to stay. We will teach you many things, and then you will be going back." Now, Alexander was an Episcopalian, still is an Episcopalian, and he talked about himself as being a creaster. Have you ever heard of a creaster? That's somebody who goes to church at Christmas and at Easter. And he said he was just never really into the faith experience. It wasn't that he didn't believe in God, but it really wasn't just something that he spent a lot of time on. But something happened in the midst of his NDE, or his near-death experience. He came to realize his understanding of science was so primitive to the existence of the divine and that unbelievable love. This amazing neuroscientist, Harvard trained, said the most important thing in the end is love. It was in that journey that he came to see that God has so much more in store for us than our limited understanding that if we find a way to connect with that unconditional love and that divine spark, then indeed God will continue to enter into this world in very real ways. We just have to believe it. In the end, for me, again, it's just like Paul's experience. I love that I found this little text. Did it really happen? Did it not? I don't know. But it's a divine, profound experience. Now, the Celtic Christians believe that there is something called the thin place. Have you ever heard of the thin place or the thin veil? That's where the holy and the human somehow find a way to engage with one another. That's where the holy and the human find a way to knit together and to become truly attuned. Perhaps it's when we're tired and we give up our need for control that we can go ahead into this thin place. Or perhaps it's that place where you don't know what else to do and you realize that God is as real as the air we breathe. Perhaps you have not experienced a near-death or an out-of-body experience, but if you have been present with someone who is in the process of death, moving from this world to the next, it's most often a pretty powerful experience where the Spirit is indeed in a way existing in a way that you don't understand, but you know it's there. This 2 weeks ago, I was at camp, and I received an email from Christina Hicks-Fadone, who is here today with her beautiful little boy. And she shared with me that her dad, Bo, was put into hospice. Bo was a young man, and 11 years ago, Bo was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. They said that he would probably live about 5 or 6 years. Here, 11 years later, Bo was living. Now, if you recall, in February, Chris's mom, Teresa, a gardener, died suddenly. At the time of her death, Teresa was the only one that Bo truly recognized, and she could even get a smile out of him. Well, I have to admit, I got this text from Christina, and I saw it, and one thing led to another. I was preaching twice a day. I was teaching a class. So I read her text in passing, and then I went on all day long and went on about my life. Late into the night, I looked at the text again, and I realized I need to text her, but it's way too late. So I went to bed thinking, I need to make a contact with Hicks. I need to make a contact with Christina. Well, that night, my friends, did it happen or did it not? I don't know, because I don't dream that much, but I was pretty tired. I had a very vivid dream. The night before, I had preached at this big Church of God. Can you believe it? I preached at the Church of God. I know, whoever the founders are, they're rolling over in their graves. And it was a big old-fashioned, like Christopher Smart designed church with white pews and a big old aisle and a big old pulpit that you stood in to preach in, which I didn't use. But there was this big old aisle, and that night I had a dream. I had a vivid dream. I had a vivid dream of this beautiful woman, Teresa, standing at the front of a church. And there at the back of the church was Bo in that really hot-looking suit. Now, I had seen this picture. I had seen this picture at Bo and Teresa's house, and Teresa had some wedding pictures up of them. And I saw Bo in that suit, and I saw Bo with a big old smile on his face looking down that aisle. And he was moving pretty slow. And of course, me being the very spiritual person I am, thought, wait a minute, this is wrong. The bride should be down there and the groom should be up there. Aren't I holy? It wasn't until the next morning that I realized Teresa is waiting for her groom. And her groom is making his way to her. And I don't think I told the kids this, but it was a pretty slow move. And as it turns out, it was a slow move. He was a very healthy 65-year-old man. And leaving this world and leaving those kids, well, that was a challenge. But he did it. And so for me, it was one of the most profound, amazing gifts I've ever had to preach a funeral where I could say, I know that bride and groom are together. I know that bride and groom are celebrating and having a new life together in life eternal. And she called him home, and he went. Now, did that really happen? I think so. Does it matter? I believe the thin veil is indeed very thin. And we're so busy doing what we think is important that we forget that God is as real as the air we breathe. I'm going to close this message today with an opportunity for you to consider breaking the thin veil and sharing in Holy Communion with your community of faith. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and be mindful of those things you've been trying to have control over and ask God to just take that over and really let you interact with the divine in a new way. I believe our desire to know God does in fact give God an opportunity to engage with us. You're here today because you have a desire to know and experience the love of God. All who are here are invited to partake in Holy Communion. You don't have to be a member of the Garden or any church. You need only believe in a love that can indeed impact your life and impact this world. We share in Holy Communion here. We invite you to come down. There'll be 2 stations here. Come on down, take a piece of bread, dip it into the cup, partake, and then return to your seats and be mindful of where God is trying to connect with you in out of this world ways. If you're not able to come forth, that is not a problem at all. We don't have any problem with that. We will come and serve you right where you are. That's no problem at all. So today, do you want to? Do you want to see if God has something in store for you that your limited mind doesn't understand? Share in Holy Communion. Share in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus in a way where it becomes real for you. In a way where it becomes so real it overcomes the evil and darkness of this world. As I said before, all who are here are invited to partake. You don't have to be a member of this church or any church. You need only believe that God is seeking to speak with you. Will you pray with me? Holy God, we come into your presence now. We come into your presence now, knowing that you're already here. Forgive us when we become so busy that we don't take time to note your desire to step into our lives in very real ways. Be with us today as we share in this feast of Holy Communion. Help us to use it to be mindful and filled with the light of Christ that can overcome the darkness of this world. Amen. If you're helping with communion, I'm going to invite you to come forth now. On the night which Jesus was betrayed, he gathered with his disciples in a large upper room. We have gluten-free bread here, so if you're gluten-free, you're welcome at this table. He took bread and he lifted it to heaven and he gave thanks to God and then he broke it. And he said, this is God's connection with you. This is God's desire to intersect with you in this world. We ask indeed that you share in this feast, that you take this bread and be mindful of the love of Christ, that Christ came, Christ taught, Christ died, and Christ lives again. Jesus also took the cup, lifted it to heaven, and gave thanks to God. Then he gave it to his disciples, his friends, and he said, take and drink of this, all of you. This is my blood poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. As often as you drink, remember me and my love for you. Let's pray. God, for these gifts we give you thanks. For the hands that toiled to prepare them for us, for the wheat that was grown, oh no, not wheat, for whatever was grown in gluten-free things so that we could experience this today. We give you thanks for the grapes and this grape juice. We give you thanks that you wish to intersect with us. So meet us here in this place. Transform us and remind us of your ever-presence. Amen. So there'll be a station here and a station here. Come down, as I said before, take a piece of bread, dip it into the loaf, and then return to your seats for prayer and reflection. In the event that you can't come forth, we'll serve you right where you are.